At 5:12, Kramatorsk Military Airfield sat half awake under a low ceiling of clouds. Without warning, North Korean forces lunged in from multiple directions. KN-09 rocket salvos and truck-mounted MLRS thundered from hidden tree lines, while Pokpung-ho tanks rumbled across open fields. Overhead, MiG-23 seconds escorted swarms of suicide and loitering drones, all converging on runways and fuel farms. This wasn't a raid, but a full-scale strike on a key air hub that anchors Ukraine's air defense and supply chain. In seconds, the quiet shattered, igniting a multi-domain battle that would test every layer of modern warfare. Don't take your eyes off the screen until the secret is revealed. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about this battle in the comments section. Thank you for watching. The opening strike rolled seamlessly out of the first shuttle. Within minutes of the 5:12 a.m. barrage, the dark horizon lit up the way. Smith's T-90 rocket batteries and truck-mounted short-range launchers cut loose a second curtain of fire. Dozens of 300mm rockets arced high, breaking apart into submunitions that rained across hangars and arch stands, throwing up walls of flame and smoke in the 600 feet high. The goal wasn't just destruction, it was to blind Ukrainian sensors and force their S-300 surface-to-air missile crews to light up radars and reveal firing positions. Overhead, MiG-23 fighter bombers dove in at roughly 650 miles per hour, skimming 1,500 feet above the fields to probe the air defenses. Each pass drew out scattered SAM launches, giving the attackers a read on where Ukraine's shield was thin. Riding their wake came swarms of suicide and loitering drones, programmed to dive on any radar signature they could find. Closer to the ground, gun-carrying combat robots, small-track platforms no larger than an ATV, crept through irrigation ditches and service roads. Their job was to harass checkpoints and sow panic, firing bursts and dropping small explosive charges to keep defenders off balance. It was a calculated pressure test, a bending of the Ukrainian perimeter. Before a single tank crossed the line, North Korea had already forced the defenders to fight on multiple levels: sky, surface, and signal, setting the stage for the heavy armored thrust still waiting in the tree line. The rocket and drone curtain from the opening assault gave way to a darker threat on the ground. Out of the tree line east of the airfield, columns of Pokpung-ho main battle tanks rolled forward under the smoke, each one a 100,000-pound steel wedge aimed straight at Kramatorsk's runways. Their tracks chewed through half-mile-wide wheat fields, engines thundering like freight trains. Behind them, armored infantry carriers rumbled in tight packs, each vehicle crammed with squads ready to storm hangars and seize fuel depots. Recon robots, no bigger than a small pickup, hugged irrigation ditches and drainage cuts, scouting for mines and relaying live video to forward command trucks hidden nearly 3 miles back. North Korean commanders sought a quick breakthrough. By planting a refueling and rearming foothold just 1,000 yards from the main taxiways, they could bring MiG-23 seconds and fresh drone waves into the fight within the hour, choking Ukraine's air operations. Speed and mass were everything. Ukraine answered with flexibility instead of brute force. T-64 tanks emerged from concealed revetments, firing and falling back in disciplined leaps to channel the enemy down pre-sighted lanes. BMP-1 infantry fighting vehicles redeployed along lateral farm roads, forming ambush pockets where their cannons could rake the flanks of advancing armor. From deeper inside the perimeter, M270 multiple launch rocket systems sent ripple fires of GPS-guided rockets that burst above the fields, dropping steel rain on the densest formations. The effect was a shifting wall of resistance. North Korean spearheads that thought they faced isolated defenders instead found themselves funneled and slowed, their map of open farmland dissolving into kill zones that changed every few minutes. Radio traffic in the Ukrainian bunkers stayed calm and clipped as commanders fed real-time drone and sensor data to tank crews and rocket batteries. By the time the lead Pokpung-ho units reached within 2,000 feet of the outer fence, their momentum had stalled. What was meant to be a fast armored rush toward the runways was now a grinding, exposed advance precisely the moment Ukraine had engineered to blunt the invasion and prepare the next phase of counterattack. The stalled, armored push became the signal for a new dimension of the fight. Even as Pak Pung-ho tanks traded fire with T-64BBs on the ground, the air above Kramatorsk military airfield turned into an invisible battlefield of signals and speed. Ukrainian S-300 batteries lit their long-range radars, forming a defensive dome that could reach targets more than 90 miles out. Within seconds, warning tones filled command posts as radar screens blossomed with fast-moving returns. From the northeast, MiG-23 fighter bombers dove in at nearly 700 miles per hour, using terrain-following profiles to duck under the first radar sweeps. Their mission: punch corridors through Ukraine's upper shield and drop ordnance directly onto the runways and refueling points. In response, Su-25 close air support jets scrambled from auxiliary strips, climbing through the smoke to intercept. What unfolded over the next minutes was a knife fight in 3 dimensions, missiles arcing up from hidden launchers, while jets snapped into high G turns just a few hundred feet off the deck. At the same time, Ukrainian electronic warfare teams triggered broadband jamming nodes patterned after the Bilmi concept. Mounted on fast 6-wheel trucks, these emitters blasted electronic noise across wide frequency bands, scrambling guidance links on hundreds of incoming drones, and feeding false coordinates to their autopilots. Drone icons blinked on and off across Ukrainian displays as many unmanned aircraft spun out of formation or crashed in the fields before reaching their release points. Yet the MiG-23 pilots adapted quickly. Some shifted to old-school tactics, cutting their radios and relying on visual cues to slip through gaps in the jamming bubble. A few managed to loose bombs from 1,500 feet, striking empty revetments and decoy fuel bladders that Ukrainian engineers had set up in advance. Every detonation sent tremors through the airfield but failed to cripple operations. Inside hardened command bunkers, officers watched this digital duel with terse efficiency, matching each new radar track with a precise missile launch or electronic countermove. The struggle overhead wasn't just about shooting down aircraft. It was about who owned the electromagnetic spectrum, who could keep sensors alive long enough to guide the next shot. By the time the MiG-23 wave began to peel away, their mission half complete, Ukraine had not only blunted the aerial assault, but also preserved the integrity of its command network, setting the stage for a decisive counterstrike on the ground. The failed air incursion left North Korea's ground thrust dangerously exposed, and Ukrainian commanders seized the moment. As MiG-23 seconds peeled away and drone signals went dark, the order flashed across encrypted channels: execute the pincer. From the west, M270 multiple launch rocket systems rolled out of tree-covered hides and elevated their pods. Within seconds, ripple salvos of guided rockets streaked skyward, each programmed to detonate above precise grid squares where Pak Pung-ho tanks and armored carriers were regrouping. The explosions rained thousands of steel fragments over a half-mile front, shredding lighter vehicles and disorienting crews still trying to sort out the electronic chaos. Simultaneously, to the east, T-64BB tank companies burst from wood lines that had masked them since the night before. Engines revved to over 40 miles per hour as they lunged into the North Korean flank, their main guns firing point-blank into side armor. The sudden crossfire caught many Pak Pung-ho formations at a standstill, forcing desperate pivots that only exposed their rear plates to additional hits. Overhead, Su-25 attack jets roared in low, barely 500 feet above the terrain, dropping precision rockets and cannon fire on columns of supply trucks and reserve armor waiting 2 miles behind the main line. Each pass severed another link in the enemy's logistics chain, isolating frontline units and starving them of fuel and ammunition. Ukrainian infantry and BMP-1 fighting vehicles moved in coordinated waves behind the armor, exploiting every breach the tanks created. Small assault teams used anti-tank missiles and portable jammers to seal pockets of resistance and prevent radio calls for reinforcement. What had begun as a measured counterattack quickly became a rolling encirclement. On digital maps inside the Ukrainian command bunker, the enemy footprint visibly shrank as red icons were sliced into smaller, disconnected clusters. Attempts by North Korean officers to regroup collapsed under the layered pressure artillery overhead, armor on both sides, and precision airstrikes from above. By late morning, large segments of the invasion force were trapped inside overlapping fire sacks less than 1,500 feet across. The Pakpung-ho spearhead that had thundered toward the airfield only an hour earlier was now fractured into isolated pockets, each one hammered relentlessly. The pincer strike had not just halted the attack, it reversed the momentum, transforming the battlefield from a North Korean advance into a Ukrainian-led chase, and setting up the next phase of containment and pursuit. The pincer strike left the surviving North Korean armor cornered against the perimeter of Kramatorsk military airfield, forcing the fight directly onto the runways and parking aprons. By late morning, the airfield itself had become a dense, close-quarters battlefield. Pakpung-ho tanks and armored carriers, some already scarred by rocket shrapnel, drove headlong across taxiways, trading point-blank fire, with T-64BV defenders holding hardened revetments only 400 to 600 feet away. Above the chaos, Su-25 attack jets screamed in at treetop level, launching rockets and 30mm cannon bursts into supply trucks and rearming points that North Korean crews were trying to establish inside the airfield fence. Precision strikes collapsed ad hoc ammo depots and cut off the remaining pockets of armor from their dwindling fuel supply. From the far side of the field, self-propelled howitzers lobbed proximity-fused shells to blanket advancing infantry squads, turning every attempt at mass movement into a kill zone. Still, scattered drone swarms kept probing. A handful of loitering munitions slipped through Ukraine's jamming umbrella, diving toward radar masts and the central fuel farm. Mobile air defense crews answered with short-range missiles and radar-guided guns, detonating most drones before they could detonate themselves. Inside the perimeter, combat engineers and medical teams moved under armored cover, racing to plug fuel line punctures, clear unexploded ordnance, and ferry the wounded. Temporary sandbag bunkers and portable runway mats went up even as fighting raged, ensuring that critical landing strips stayed usable. By early afternoon, the once orderly airbase looked like a burning maze of broken tarmac and smoking vehicles. But its strategic backbone, the primary 10,500 feet runway, the main fuel points, and key command shelters remained intact. North Korea had hoped to seize or disable the field. Instead, the clash on the concrete turned their stalled advance into a static graveyard, locking in Ukraine's defensive advantage and paving the way for the final encirclement to come. With the airfield secured and the enemy armor crippled, Ukrainian commanders moved to seal every escape corridor. The battered North Korean units, pushed out of the runways and forced into narrow farm lanes less than 50 feet wide, tried to regroup and break south. Recon drones and ground scouts instantly mapped each movement, feeding coordinates to mobile strike teams. From concealed positions, rapid reaction infantry and BMP-1 carriers raced ahead, cutting off choke points before the enemy columns arrived. Small gun-carrying recon robots, each the size of a quad bike, scouted drainage ditches and tree lines, ensuring ambush sites stayed clear of mines and tripwires. Whenever a North Korean convoy turned, fresh Ukrainian firepower tanks, rockets, or guided mortar rounds closed the trap again. Cut off from higher command and with supply trucks burning miles behind, North Korean formations began to disintegrate. Crews abandoned heavy vehicles, leaving dozens of tanks and APCs bogged in mud or aflame. Several field officers were captured alive, their radios still hissing with static. Amid the tightening ring, Ukrainian medics moved in behind the assault teams, evacuating their own wounded and giving first aid to surrendering soldiers. The contrast was striking. A lethal, layered encirclement paired with deliberate humanitarian care. An unmistakable signal that even in total victory, Ukraine's aim was defense and survival, not vengeance. By nightfall, the encirclement described earlier had achieved its aim. Kramatorsk airfield stood intact, its primary 10,500 feet runway and fuel points operational, while scores of North Korean tanks and carriers lay destroyed or abandoned. Captured officers and disrupted supply lanes confirmed a decisive break in the enemy's plan. Strategically, The failed assault forced Pyongyang to rethink its entire corridor of advance and eased pressure on nearby sectors, buying Ukraine critical time to reposition forces, yet questions linger. Will the attackers pivot to multi-layer, unconventional strikes or escalate electronic warfare? As the last smoke column faded in the sunset, a Ukrainian medic rinsed a captive soldier's wound beside a Su-25 taxiing for patrol, a quiet emblem of resilience and restrained strength. At 2:17 a.m. on the outskirts of Kyiv, the night lay still until the sky suddenly lit up. Without warning, a Russian submarine deep in the Black Sea launched a salvo of Caliber cruise missiles streaking toward the capital at hundreds of miles per hour. Within seconds, Ukraine's air defenses roared to life. A captured Panzer S-1, alongside NASAMS and Patriot batteries, unleashed interceptors. This was no ordinary bombardment. It was the opening move of a counteroffensive that would redefine modern warfare. The thunder of interceptors over Kyiv had barely faded when Ukraine struck back. From hidden launch sites along the Dnipro River, wave after wave of kamikaze UAVs and nimble FPV drones lifted into the night air. At first glance, they looked like oversized hobby planes. But each carried 80 to 100 pounds of explosives tucked inside its narrow fuselage. Flying low, sometimes just 100 feet above the treetops, they hugged the riverbanks and forest lines, weaving northward to slip under Russian radar nets. It wasn't just a handful of drones. It was a swarm. A storm of cheap, expendable machines, overwhelming systems designed to hunt jets, not bicycles with wings. Their flight paths converged toward the border. Blinking dots on Ukrainian operator screens, every one a moving warhead. At the same time, the ground shook as launchers fired off a volley of US-supplied ATACMS. The missiles roared eastward at nearly Mach 3, covering hundreds of miles in minutes. Their targets: a Russian helicopter staging area and an ammunition storage site outside Rostov-on-Don. The combination was deliberate UAVs saturating defenses, ATAC-MS smashing high-value targets. One was the Scalpel, the other, the Hammer. Together they signaled a new kind of warfare. Asymmetric, unpredictable, and terrifyingly effective. For Russia, it wasn't just a physical blow to logistics. It was proof that the sky itself could no longer be trusted. The echoes of exploding depots near Rostov were still rolling across the steppe when the next phase began. Ukraine's counteroffensive shifted from the skies to the ground. At first light, dust clouds rose on the horizon as armored columns surged forward. Leading the spearhead were German-built Leopard 2, A-6 tanks and Britain's Challenger 2-2, their 120mm smoothbore cannons primed for the fight. They weren't alone. Armored personnel carriers rumbled behind, disgorging infantry squads in combat gear. Small tracked robots, mine-laying and obstacle-breaching units scuttled ahead of the formation, planting charges and clearing paths through Russian defenses. It was a combined arms advance designed to punch through, not probe. Moscow's answer came quickly. Russian T-90M tanks, bristling with reactive armor, rolled into position to block the thrust. Overhead, Su-35 fighter jets screamed in low, their afterburners shaking windows as they loosed guided rockets in support of the tanks below. The battlefield turned into a furnace. Shells slammed into earth and steel with concussive force, tossing dirt 30 feet into the air. The Challenger 2-2, with their reinforced Chobham armor, absorbed direct hits and kept pushing forward. Leopards maneuvered with precision, firing on the move, each round a 45-pound sabot dart slicing through Russian armor. The first T-90M burst into flames, its turret blown skyward by the ammunition cook-off. But Russia fought back. Their tanks dug into hull-down positions, trading shots at 2,000 yards. Su-35 circled back for another pass. The fight might have tipped their way, but the skies were not theirs to command. Ukrainian FPV drones buzzed overhead, spotting targets and guiding artillery fire. Precision strikes rained down, smashing Russian armor concealed in tree lines. Then came the invisible hand of electronic warfare. Russian EW trucks activated powerful jammers, scrambling GPS signals, blinding drones mid-flight. Some UAVs crashed into the dirt, their operators staring at dead screens. But Ukraine had planned for this. Backup inertial guidance kicked in, and not all drones were silenced. Enough remained to keep the pressure relentless. It was a brutal, grinding clash of steel and fire. Every mile gained cost blood and fuel. But slowly, inexorably, the Ukrainian column pressed forward. For the first time in months, Russian armor was not dictating the terms of battle, it was struggling to survive it. The clash of tanks below was only half the fight. Above Rostov, the sky itself turned into a battlefield. As Ukrainian Leopards and Challengers pushed through Russian armor, the roar of jet engines cut across the dawn. Two squadrons of Ukrainian MiG-29 and Su-27, sleek silhouettes slicing through the early light, rose to meet the threat. From the east, Russian Su-35 thundered in, their twin engines leaving glowing trails across the horizon. Almost instantly, the air erupted. Cannon fire streaked across the sky as 30mm shells ripped past cockpits at 2,500 feet. Pilots banked hard, pulling G-forces that pinned them against their seats. Missiles launched bright flares of aim, 120 AMRA-AMs from the Ukrainians, countered by Russian R-77 streaking head-on at nearly Mach 4. Each explosion lit the clouds with fireballs, shockwaves rolling across the city below. One Su-27 took a hit and spiraled away, its pilot ejecting just in time as the jet tore into farmland outside the city. But Ukraine struck back. A MiG-29 locked onto a Su-35 maneuvering too low. The AIM-120 found its mark, punching straight into the fuselage. The Russian fighter vanished in a ball of flame, debris raining down on the outskirts of Rostov. The crash sent shockwaves through Russian media, proof that their most advanced fighter wasn't untouchable. As the dogfight raged, the noise was deafening. Civilians in Rostov watched from balconies, cell phones raised, capturing glowing streaks and frantic tracer fire. To them, it was no longer a distant war. The fight was right above their heads. But the air battle had a deeper purpose. Every second Ukrainian pilots tied up Su-35 in combat. The skies opened for the swarms of drones launched hours earlier. Unnoticed and unhindered, those low-flying UAVs continued their steady crawl north, slipping under radar, aiming for fuel depots and industrial hubs deeper inside Russia. By the time the last missiles burned out and the surviving jets disengaged, the battlefield had changed. Ukraine had lost planes, but Russia had lost something more valuable: the illusion of air superiority over its own territory. For the first time, Rostov's skyline was scarred by falling wreckage, and the path was cleared for the next phase of the offensive. The skies over Rostov were still glowing from falling wreckage when Ukraine shifted the fight further east. By midnight, new coordinates lit up on Ukrainian command screen's Ryazan, a critical hub of fuel reserves and ammunition stockpiles feeding the Russian front. If Rostov was the shield, Ryazan was the lifeline. Cutting it would mean cracking open the road to Moscow. The strike began with thunder. HIMARS batteries hidden in tree lines unleashed ripple fires of GPS-guided rockets, their trails carving arcs through the night. Moments later, US-supplied ATACMS missiles screamed overhead at nearly Mach 3, covering over 180 miles in minutes. Their warheads slammed into fuel depots with seismic force, erupting into fireballs hundreds of feet high. The ground shook as secondary explosions consumed stockpiles of artillery shells. But this was more than raw firepower, it was layered warfare. Ukrainian electronic warfare vehicles rolled into position, jamming Russian radios and scrambling satellite uplinks. Defensive orders issued from Moscow never reached frontline units. For minutes that felt like hours, Russian commanders were blind, unable to coordinate. In that chaos, the ground war crept closer. Small tracked robots loaded the dirt and nearly silent slipped forward through minefields and trench lines. With precise charges, they detonated barriers, clearing paths in the wire. Seconds later, Leopard 2A6 tanks roared through the breaches, their engines growling, their cannons cutting through what remained of Russian defenses. By dawn, the situation was clear. Smoke rose over Ryazan, fuel still burning, ammunition dumps shattered. Russian lines were fractured, their communications in tatters. For Ukraine, this was the turning point. The defensive wall that once shielded Moscow was collapsing, leaving a corridor wide open to the capital itself. The road to Moscow had never been closer. The flames over Ryazan were still burning when the next phase began. At 3:48 a.m., operators in Kyiv watched their screens as new waves of long-range UAVs larger than anything used before crossed into Moscow's air defense zone. They came from every direction. North along the Volga River, west through low valleys, east hugging treetop cover. To radar, they appeared as clutter, as birds, as background noise. To Moscow, they were the storm. The city's vaunted defenses roared awake. Panzer S-1 systems mounted on rooftops spat streams of tracer fire into the sky, while S-400 missile batteries outside the capital launched interceptors at supersonic speeds. For a moment, the skyline lit up with explosions and contrails. A lethal fireworks display over 12 million sleeping civilians. Yet there were simply too many. The swarm saturated every layer of defense. For each UAV destroyed, two more slipped through the gaps. Some dived into oil refineries on the city's edge, their payloads erupting into fireballs that rose hundreds of feet. Others smashed into ammunition warehouses, detonating with a thunderclap that rattled windows miles away. Panic spread instantly. Airports at Vnukovo and Domodedovo shut down. Incoming flights diverted mid-air. Highways leading into the capital were sealed off by checkpoints. Sirens wailed through districts near the Kremlin, where residents filmed burning debris from their balconies, voices trembling as the war they once thought distant arrived above their own rooftops. By dawn, the once untouchable capital was reeling. Black smoke curled into the morning sky, traffic frozen, emergency crews racing from one inferno to the next. For the first time since World War II, Moscow's defenses had been pierced wide open. The illusion of safety was gone. The heart of Russia was exposed. The smoke from burning depots on Moscow's edge was still rising when the last wave of drones made its approach. Unlike the others, these weren't headed for warehouses or fuel tanks. Their course was plotted straight toward the city's skyline, the gleaming symbols of wealth and power. At 4:12 a.m., one UAV broke through the final curtain of defenses, skimming just 200 feet above the streets before climbing sharply. Its target loomed ahead: Evolution Tower, the twisting glass giant of Moscow's financial district. Seconds later, the night shattered. A thunderous blast ripped through the tower, blowing out multiple floors of glass. Fire erupted upward, flames licking across its curved facade. Shards rained down onto the streets below, the shockwave rattling windows for blocks. For ordinary Muscovites, the message was undeniable. This wasn't a depot on the outskirts or a strike hidden in distant provinces. This was the very heart of their capital under attack. The war had come home. And in that moment, one truth cut through the smoke: nowhere in Russia was safe anymore. The flames still licking across Evolution Tower marked more than just shattered glass. They marked a turning point. Ukraine had punched through Russia's vaunted defenses from Rostov to Moscow, striking at the very symbol of its capital. The illusion of invulnerability was gone, forcing Russia to pull defenses away from the front just to shield its own heartland. Yet amid the chaos, Ukrainian soldiers pulled wounded Russian troops from the rubble, a reminder that victory is not only destruction, but dignity. Above Moscow's skyline, black smoke curled upward, and a lone drone vanished into the clouds. The war was far from over. The blast was instant and catastrophic. One mine detonated, then another, then the entire chain. 30 TM 62-second went off in a cascading roar, equivalent to nearly 8 tons of TNT. The shockwave lifted the bridge deck upward like a toy, shattering the 2 central spans. Concrete and rebar disintegrated into a cloud of dust and fire. Water from the Nezhegol River shot skyward in a geyser nearly 120 feet high, raining back down in a thunderous curtain. The entire valley shook as fragments rained across both banks. When the dust cleared, the bridge was gone, its heart ripped out in one decisive strike. The thunder of the bridge collapse still echoed across the valley when the Russians answered back. From concealed positions on the far bank, 122mm howitzers barked to life. Shells whistled overhead and slammed into the Ukrainian approach, gouging craters into the earth and sending dirt and shrapnel spraying across the armored column. But Ukraine had prepared for the counterpunch. Rising above the tree line, a Shrike kamikaze drone nearly the size of a light aircraft banked sharply and dove. Its camera fixed on the muzzle flashes of a pair of D-30 howitzers tucked behind camouflage netting. In seconds, the Shrike plowed into the first gun, the explosion ripping it apart. The second was hit moments later, its crew scattered as flames